So, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the session that is called Climate Fiction for the Decaying World. It's an engagement with the Earthbound Anthology. Um, Please join us for this conversation. It's about us exploring how literature, storytelling, and imagination can help us understand the climate crisis and envision new possibilities for coexistence on a changing planet. Let me introduce you to our speakers. We have Alina Gufran. She's an author and filmmaker based in New Delhi. Her novel, No Place to Call My Own, was longlisted for the Godrej Literature Live Literary Award for Best Debut. Her film Leela premiered at IFFR and has screened at the San Sebastian International Film Festival, DocuFest, Riga International Film Festival, MAMI, and DIFF, amongst others. We have Prthvir Solanki. He's a writer whose work spans fiction and nonfiction for both print and screen. We have Prashant Vaze. He's a British writer, environmentalist, and a policy wonk. We have Ayushi Dubey. She's a reader, a writer, and an observer trying to locate her narrative in this scattered world. Her work has been published previously in #Kalakar and Bound India. We have Monisha Raman. She's an author of The Highlines of Yore. Her work has appeared in various journals and anthologies. She edits the GLF newsletter. And I am the content and program lead at GLF and BLF Hyderabad and Bangalore. I am also an author of the poetry collection called Poetry for the Overgrown, which explores themes of nature and coexistence. Welcome you all. I hand it over to Monisha now.
So, hi everyone, welcome. And first of all, congratulations to all of you on this beautiful anthology. Congratulations to all of you on this beautiful anthology. So, without since Shruti's all introduced the anthology, I'll go directly with my questions. I'll start with you, Alina, the editor. Can you just give us an introduction on what, can you just introduce Earthbound to our listeners and what you plan to do with it and what are your dreams?
Yeah, sure. So Earthbound, I think, was sort of born out of this consciousness of trying to use fiction as a tool for advocacy around climate change or climate action, or some kind of conversation through the aspect of storytelling that doesn't alienate people, because we do see a lot of headlines and we see climate data and climate policy, but I think it's just reached a point where the world has kind of looked the other way. So for me personally, as a writer and an editor, fiction is a fairly powerful way of self-interrogation and a lens through which I view the world. So yeah, Earthbound was born out of that idea, and now it's one of the first, the anthology, Earthbound. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that, Alina. And interesting. And I guess you've sort of pulled that with this anthology. And and my next question is also to you. So we know that fiction is to ask the hard questions. Many writers in the past have said that. And what do you think is the role of climate fiction? Is it to educate or ask the hard questions? Or do you think climate fiction itself boils down to just education and tell them about this carbon, carbon metrics and all of these things? Or do you think just an emotional storytelling thing?
Yeah, so I don't really believe that the role of fiction is to educate. I think that's what textbooks and academia and to a large extent nonfiction is for. The role of fiction for me personally, amongst many things, one of the fact or things that I think it contributes to in the world is the ability to interrogate, and not just yourself, but systems, things around you, the ability to like put yourself in someone else's shoes and experience life from their eyes, because we're all quite sitting in like the nucleus of our privileges, right? And it's very difficult for us to really see the world from outside our own perspective. And I especially feel that with modern society, a lot of the systems that we're a part of, including technology and social media, to a large extent, kind of feeds this narcissistic sort of self-inquiry, right? I feel like fiction allows you to step away from this sort of, very oppressive way of looking at the world, which is self-focused, and allows you to look at the world from a larger, more empathetic sense. And it's that classic thing, right? Like when you read a headline that says, oh, 100 people died in floods in Himachal. I mean, I'm in Himachal right now, and there was a landslide like 2 weeks ago. It's a different matter when you read a headline like that, and when you read a story about someone who was maybe traveling through the region, or maybe had taken his flock out to graze in the mountain, and then something happened to that person's life. So I guess historically that has been the role of fiction. It's to um, take the giant kind of sweep of humanity and try to reduce it to the experience of the individual. Yeah.
Yeah, beautifully said. Thank you. And I'll go to you, Prthvir. I'll start with you. So it's a beautiful story, and it kind of shows some complexities in our societies, like all the stories in this anthology do. And yours especially shows the side of zealotry, with in a society like ours, where we are used to hero worshipping, and in times of crisis, like the ones that happen in your story, we just switch over to zealotry, and there's a blind belief with whatever the leader says, it has to be done. So, what made you connect these two threads, Prithvir?
Um, I mean, the world one, but also I think for me the story of climate change is not simply a passive one where it is happening around us, as many like to claim once in a while, but it is a story of a lack of response, or incorrect response rather. And uh, uh, and and also, of course, actions that have been taken incorrectly. Basically, this is the point of this. What I was thinking is that all of this is man-made. It is human-made. Climate change is human-made. It's not something that has naturally occurred on the planet. And when you have to start questioning, okay, if it's human-made, then what humans did that, and why did they do that? And if it starts happening, it is humans who have to sort of solve the problem. And essentially, it becomes a very human thing. And the way politics or the way society is right now it is exactly as you said, right? Like we have turned to zealotry, and we have turned to kind of blind belief and faith uh, when real life becomes difficult. And often the people we put faith in don't necessarily respond in ways that is always helpful to the people who believe in them. And I mean, I see that everywhere, right? And I think we all do. And it became a very natural way for me to kind of make an observation of where society could be headed. I think the main point that I just wanted to make was that where is the line when you start, realizing that you are being fooled, or where is the line where you start realizing that I cannot blindly believe in something anymore, but I have to start thinking for myself. And the story kind of answers that there are some people who will never find that line, right? They will go with whatever is happening, and they will believe what they want to believe. And sometimes it could be just to kind of placate themselves, or sometimes it is simply because they don't want to believe. And the story wants to deal with that question, basically.
Yeah, thank you, Prithvi. Prashant, I'll come to you next. When there's a crisis in the society, when there's a scarcity, that's when the rifts come apart in any society. And in yours, the needs of the bourgeois are prioritized. And there's something that's not addressed in climate change conversations, the cultural hegemony behind, that is truly prevalent in a society, at all times. So this part of this intersectionality is not being addressed in climate change conversations. So what made you come up with this kind of a scenario? A little thought behind the story.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Monisha. Just so to bring people up to speed, um, in my story, it's set a few years after the collapse of civilization on a small island called Sitadweep, which is roughly modeled on India's Lakshadweep. And to your question, the European guests in a hotel are grabbing an unfair proportion of the island's scarce water resources, and are also kind of dominating the staff in the hotel, even though it's many years after the collapse of civilization. Um, and in sort of the most kind of powerful setting of within the story, one of the hotel staff members is kind of held in the heat, tied up as a punishment for stealing. So this is really kind of reflecting that as the global commons shrink, as we're seeing with climate change, I don't think there's any reason to believe that the pie will be shared equally between people. I mean, I'm living in the UK over summer, and what we're seeing at the moment here is that aid budgets have been cut. I mean, I work my sort of day job as a development economist. USAID got closed down entirely last year, and it's highly likely, I think, that as we end up contesting resources, that the people who already got positions of power will try to hold on to that power. So this is sort of shown very graphically in that short story, but I think it's a phenomenon that we need to just bear in mind that it's likely to happen. And I think this whole movement of climate justice, that a disproportionate share of the negative consequences from both climate adaptation and mitigation will probably fall upon the most vulnerable. I think as a society, we need to really sort of wake up to that. And in a way, this story is trying to say that don't assume that people will remain kind-hearted and generous. That's just not the case. I mean, I was reading figures for polling in England recently, and 60% of people consider aid money to be the most unnecessary part of government spending in the UK. So it's not just the US where people feel like this. This is the top priority for public expenditure cuts for British people. Just bear that in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant. I'll move over to you, Ayushi. Laila Ka Patang, a beautiful story. And, when the story begins, it's showed as a fairly utopian society and everything goes as per the norms and thing. But as the thing progresses with the characters, journey, we understand that it's a fairly fundamental society and Puritan one at that. And we see that, the conflict between the characters' independence and the societal norms and values that are expected out of her. And what went into the making of this community? That is something that really interested me.
Okay, so the first thought to the prompt of this anthology was that I wanted to build a community that rests on the bridge of reality and fiction. So every technological advance that you find in the story, it has already been established in the world, even though it's big science now, it's big machines, big scientists, but but the thought behind it was that I wanted to create a community where it is governed by common people. There are no big scientists and big corporations involved, because I wanted to shift the narrative away from white climate fiction and more towards African futurism, which is a concept by Nnedi Okorafor. And it is basically that America is not the only place that survives when the catastrophe strikes us. And we are able to imagine futures or communities where it is governed by common people, and by common people I mean people like us, people. And I'm not saying that people from science background are not allowed there, but rather the corporation part of sustainable development is taken away. So the two factors that involve building any community is structure and meaning. So structure, I've already told that I wanted the community to be influenced by the theories that current climate social activists or professors already have. Like, for example, the community should be, your adobe should be next to a forest. That is the best way to go about a sustainable development. It cannot be in a city of concrete. You cannot have sustainable development in a city that is built on concrete. The other factor is meaning. Meaning, where the most central motive in the story is nervousness. every character is nervous because they are just recovering from the great disaster that struck, and now they have built this community. And this community solely rests on the balance that everybody is under the agreement that they have foregone their selfish endeavors. That is the first thing. The indulgence is gone. They are agreeing to the factor, they're agreeing to the idea that rationing is very real, and they have to sort of mold themselves and their basically personalities to what is required of them to maintain the system where everybody gets to eat, drink, and live, basically. So now I specifically did not introduce a climax or a climatic destruction of the society towards the end, because for me the main question is not that the clash is between individual versus the system that they are residing in, but rather where the nuances. How do we educate the young generation with who will be basically ruling the world now? How do we make them develop thought which is symbiotic with nature? It is like, for example, and that idea came with a conversation I was having with another writer, and I asked him that how do we make other people understand through our storytelling that individual inspirations are important, but they should be in balance between the resources that they are going to use for those inspirations. And he said that the first and foremost thing is that from the beginning of elementary education, you have to introduce the idea that for example, your passion for whatever career you choose is clearly and very openly balanced with how you're going to maintain the resources that are already depleting. So, and very interestingly, the first meetup that Earthbound organized for us, where we were talking with policymakers and social activist, I asked a question where said the same question I put to a policymaker, and she said that this question will not be relevant in future because rationing will be a very real thing. So you have a ration for, let's say, 100 rupees to like spend on any resource. You can either buy a car from that or 2 months of food. So whatever your aspirations are, it depends how you choose the ration to spend on. And my idea of rationing resources and knowledge in the story has already taken effect in our world. I mean, the water crisis is not a new thing, but it is now affecting the middle class and upper middle class, so it has become a real thing. But so the rationing is already there. Where I am in Pune, and we are already getting rationed water. So yes, that was the thought behind the community, the structure and meaning behind sustainable development, basically.
Interesting, very interesting. And it made me reflect on the importance of native wisdom now, native knowledge. That's something your story touches upon as well.
Yes.
So thank you for that, Ayushi. Alina, I'll move to you for the next few questions, and maybe we can pause for audience questions, and then we'll continue again. We'll resume again. So my next question to you, Alina, is there's a beautiful balance in this anthology. It's not entirely dystopian. At no point is a reader, fear invoked in a reader. The stories are tactful, they're sensitive, and they're candid. So how difficult was it, Alina, to strike that balance as an editor?
A classic. No, so I was gonna say that it's I feel like the stories were chosen for their inherent merit, right? So like it was an open call. We didn't exactly solicit writers. So it was an open call, and then we got a bunch of entries, and as always, it's very difficult actually to pass through everything and like select the best stories. Also, I don't really believe in that superlative, right? Because the stories that I wanted to assemble together made sense for this particular anthology. So one is that the stories came with their own inherent like identity, I would say. And the writer's kind of DNA. And this is the trick with anthology. This is also the first anthology I'm editing. I've only edited like singular pieces before. But this was a bit of a learning curve for me as well, because I wanted to work with the writers to enhance the story to the best readability and the most engaging form that the story could be, while the stories also spoke to each other. And some of that thematically, of course, there's a lot of overlapping themes. I feel like that's the easiest thing to crack. But certain things I think I've worked with the writers was to achieve like stylistically. So it's things happening maybe in the subtext a little bit that may not be very clear to just a reader, but it's something that has been technically put together, right? So I would say that most of the stories play a lot with negative space. There's a lot that happens off screen, for example. The pacing in a lot of the stories is, I wouldn't say similar to each other, but reflective of each other. So there were these sort of slight technical sleight of hands that I tried to employ to give the stories a more cohesive feel overall. I mean, to be honest, like if I was to go back and edit it, I would definitely change around the order, for example. But that's just the curse of the writer or the editor. There's always something you can change. But I do want to say that the stories that I eventually selected already had a strength of character, if I can use that phrase for writing. And then it was just a matter of working with the writer to ensure that the story could truly sing. So yeah, half the work was just done by the fact that the idea existed and had come to me. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. And I can really sense that strength of character in more stories. Yeah, so my next question is, you see, when with stories, especially when you use fiction to speak about climate change, fiction as a tool, there's always this confusion of overloading information, and there's too much information going into the stories. But this anthology didn't have that demerit, and the stories kind of flowed smoothly. So how, to any aspiring author, how would you suggest hitting that emotional nerve in reader through climate change, climate fiction stories? So what would be your suggestion?
I feel like I've just edited the anthology. The writers have written it, so they know better, But maybe we can ask them as well. But for me personally, it would be not pontificating, right? Because I do feel a lot of reportage on climate change does tend to do that. The language matters. What are you reducing the entire sweep of civilization to? To give a small example, like Prithvir's story is quite funny. It's got a tongue-in-cheek. It's obviously quite dark and it's tackling a very dark matter. But when I was reading it, even for the first time before any of the edits, I was kind of laughing out loud. And I think knowing Prithvir a little bit, I feel like that's what he's really good at, amongst other things, right? So he played to that strength. So it's like when you're experiencing the story, you're like relating to the protagonist, Ravi. You're sort of resonating with his anger and his frustration because all of us at some point have faced that frustration, in different aspects of our life. So I would say that like leaning into your strengths as the kind of writer you are and weaving that into the story you're writing without worrying about like, oh, what does this say about climate change or what is the point it's trying. I feel like, writers should not, the minute you try to make a point is when you like really lose the story to a large degree. I feel like if you set out to observe to the best you can and like you set out to sort of chronicle a moment in time or a certain behavior or a certain shift, then that's your job, and if you do it well then that's your job done, right? So yeah, for example, like Prashant's story has the way I read it had a slightly more like traditional structure which worked, which was its strength. So that's something that he could have kind of honed further, and it like in many ways when I read Prashant's story I was like, oh, this could be the beginning of a novel. Actually, it had that sort of classic this thing, right? So yeah, I mean, I can really go on about what each of the stories really brought, but I would say that like lean into your own voice as a writer, irrespective of whether you want to talk about climate change or gender or labor. I feel like that comes second. Each writer, like through their life, has recurrent preoccupations that occupies their work. But I feel like instead of sort of being in your head about it, it's better to perhaps pursue a character or a story, right? And let the concerns be the subtext, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alina. So we'll take some questions from the audience before we continue with our questions again. So if anybody has any question, can you all raise your hand or just drop it in the chat box?
Monisha, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please, Bendik, go ahead.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining
Hi.
the Literature Festival session today. We are honored. Yeah. My question is to Prashant Vaze. I think I relate more to his work. Uh, Firstly, tell us a bit about Greenhouse Think Tank, Prashant, and also about your book, Economical Environmentalist. They sound very interesting.
Well, the Greenhouse Think Tank, it's a small UK-based think tank, which is really trying to help the Green Party in the UK formulate economic policies, welfare policies. So I've written a few papers about how more money could be shoved from the West into the southern countries. We tend to work quite closely with Green Party politicians, and the Green Party's done rather well recently, so that's why we're on a bit of a roll, and I'm a director of that particular think tank. Your second question was about the Economical Environmentalist. I think I wrote that probably about 15 years ago, but that's a non-fiction book. It's really across 8 or 9 chapters talking about my efforts to reduce my greenhouse gas emissions by 60%, which was then it was the target of the UK to reduce emissions by that much. And I mean, professionally, I work as an environmental economist. So I used to work as a civil servant in the UK, various ministries. And one of my roles was to try to develop a marginal abatement cost curve for the UK economy, so work out exactly how much it will cost for Britain to fully decarbonise. So I tried to apply the same kind of discipline to my own kind of life. So there'd be chapters on food, how to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from consuming less beef, going to a more vegetarian diet, those kind of things. Another on travel, where, spoiler alert, fly less and drive a small car or bicycle. Heating the home, and that was just the trials and tribulations of trying to insulate a house, which is a Victorian house, with the very tough regulations around preserving character, heritage, all that kind of stuff. And then I also got married that year, so I was trying to do a low carbon honeymoon. So it was just general cost benefit analysis on particular decisions people can make in the UK. It's still relevant, even though it's about 15 years old. Some of the advice will have changed a bit.
So for an economist, is it easier to write fiction, or is it difficult to write fiction?
I wanted to be I wanted to be a writer way before I wanted to be an economist. I fell into economics. So I think the question is really, is it easier for a writer to become an economist or not? I don't know. But you do see a lot of writers, especially in science fiction, are people with a scientific background. So my own background was in biochemistry and biology.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bendik, for your questions. And yeah, I have a background in biotechnology as well, Prashant. So nice meeting another scientific nerd here. And yeah, so I'll move to Prthvir now. Prthvir, you write for the screen as well, and you can somehow with screen and you get the audience. What is it? Whatever it is, the feedback instantly, and than through literature, the screen feedback is more prominent. And since you juggle between fiction and screenwriting, and what do you think works more? What kind of climate stories work more in your opinion? And one is what you're drawn to, like speculative fiction, like hardcore speculative fiction, dystopian, showing a dystopian world, or stories of hope. What are you drawn to, and what do you think audience expect of storytellers in general?
Personally, I think I'm naturally drawn to a little more speculative stuff, but I don't think in any way that means that I believe that is the best vehicle to tell climate change stories. It just happens to be what I'm drawn to in general. But I do think that we do need both kind of stories. Like, we do need hopeful stories, and we do need the dystopian ones, because I think having hope is kind of like a recognition that something is wrong, right? Like, you have hope for change because you realize that something needs change. And quite often, I think recognizing something is wrong requires anger and a recognition that things are not things aren't really going the way we want them to go right now. And so I think these things do need to work in tandem, and as writers, as whatever form of writing you're doing, what we have to respond to instead is, where are we as a society right now? Are we how bad is it, and are we doing enough? And if we're not doing enough, does that mean we have to get people angry before we get them hopeful? And so that becomes what you can choose to do. I think any writer can choose to do how they please, like what they think is going to. But again, I agree largely with what Alina was saying earlier, which is that I also don't think it is the role of the fiction writer to spur the people on. So when I'm writing a story, the idea isn't that I want to tell people what to think, or it's more I am sort of dealing with my own confusion. I don't have the answers to anything. I'm not a scientist. I'm not. I'm simply a person who is writing, and I want to be a reflection of that, which I think a lot of people are. Whether it is anxiety or anger or whatever it is, right? Like in this story, for example, it is more anger and anxiety because that is what I feel, and it doesn't necessarily resolve itself in a neat way either. But that's because I don't have it resolved in my head either. And I feel like being able to reflect that and show that, okay, if you feel the same way, you're not the only person feeling that way. And if that brings about certain sort of rage and awareness, that's great. uh, and as I said, the only way you can actually be hopeful of something is when you recognize something is bad, and recognition does require an amount of rage. It does require some amount of being pissed off with what's happening. And yeah, and I think I don't think it's fair to sort of, for us to be like, okay, we need to have hopeful stories and we need to have despair, like dystopian stories. I think that we do need both of them because they're both serving a certain purpose, as long as the writers of these stories are also honest about how they feel, because there are hopeful writers and there are less hopeful writers, but both of them should be telling their stories because both of them want the same thing, that things are okay. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Prithvir. And I think the solution does that beautifully, a tongue-in-cheek narrative, and it makes you think, and it does that beautifully. And Prashant, I'll move to you. Hotel Wall, the title of your story, is very intriguing, and I was waiting to dig in what comes beneath the title. So there's AI. You use AI as a destructive force there, and you portray AI as a destructive force, and what happens later is not really melodramatic, and there's a kind of subtle realism to it. So how you showed it, and can you give us a little thoughts on what went into this world building?
Sure. Just on the title first, I mean, the Hotel Wall, it's based. So in Goa, in India, I live very near the Grand Hyatt Hotel, and it is famously building a huge seawall, which is sort of encroaching upon the public beach. And it's really very much you're inside the wall, and within the hotel compound, and you've got this beautiful lawn, and then the people outside this wall, which is literally just encroaching and pushing us into the sea. It's really a metaphor for how this kind of rich, privileged people within this gated community are kind of continuing to enjoy the fruits of this dwindling resource of the water available on the island. So that was the kind of thinking behind the title of the Hotel Wall, and it's very much real. My wife is quite actively campaigning against the hotel's encroachment like this. On the world building, I mean, the story itself is set a few 5 years after some great calamity, which is where the AIs have a short duration war against humanity and essentially bring down civilization. It's very much in the backdrop of the story, and I was quite attracted to the way that Lord of the Flies, that William Golding book, it never really talks about why those kids were on the island. They were on an island, but we just know that there has been something that's happened, and they found themselves essentially going feral because some calamities occurred outside. And I think the book ends with the British Navy coming rocking up to the island and rescuing them. So I wanted that kind of atmosphere of a tragedy occurred somewhere outside. In most of my fiction, I have this sort of unified universe in which there is this kind of AI war. In fact, my book, The Rising Tide, that's more centrally talks about the war between the AIs and humanity that occurs in the mid 2040s. What it's really trying to say is that climate change is one of those. I mean, I've been working professionally now for 35 years on climate change issues. When I first started in 1990, it was a very low impact. Nobody really knew what was going on. It was really not until 1992 with the Rio conference that it became, the source of the convention and all this kind of thing. So it's been a chronic problem for, my professional career of 35 years. But what has happened in the intervening year has been these kind of acute issues like the financial crisis of 2007-8, where suddenly all the banking rules were changed, and suddenly it became very difficult for rich countries to lend to poor countries because banking regulations under the Basel Convention toughened up. Last decade we had COVID, which suddenly acutely introduced restrictions on travel, restrictions on flying, and policymakers are suddenly centered around those kind of issues. So I think AI is going to be the problem over the next few decades. And this is the kind of acute problem that AI could go to war, which is where this kind of world building is taking place. Or it could be the kind of chronic issue of, worklessness. I mean, I think in India, something like 80% of engineers now don't get work from when they qualify because of this reduction in demand for newly minted civil engineers, electrical engineers, those kind of things. So I wanted to tackle the acute AI problem. And I mean, again, a bit of a spoiler alert. In my books, I talk about rich billionaires, who are intent on living forever. They effectively are using AI to train, machine learn their own lives. So the training data set for these people is their own experiences, what books they've read, all the emails they've sent, everybody they've ever spoken to. So instead of the AI being trained on everything, it's being trained on just one human being, one personality, and it's a way of people replicating themselves. But if you think about what that will do, it'll give immense power to people, or these AIs, but also the foibles of those people. So imagine an Elon Musk suddenly living forever and being the heart and soul of an AI. So imagine that kind of world. So that's the kind of backdrop. But in this particular short story, I didn't really develop it. I've written other stories where those kind of ideas are developed more. But I mean, the general message is climate change is going to be a really, really big problem over the next coming decades. But policymakers will continue to be have their attention drawn to other things. So at the moment, we're going through a right-wing phase with reform in the UK, BJP, and whatever it gets up to in India, and similar kind of things in many other countries. And I think that will dominate economic politics for the next 5-10 years, rather than climate change, sadly.
Yes, and that's a sad reality as well. And your story is very timely considering the data centers that are about to hit India. So, yeah. And Ayushi, I'll move to you. Leila Ka Patang is a very interesting society. What drew me was the little mannerisms of the characters and the little details of the dress and everything. I was especially interested in it because I tried to create a society like that. I mean, a similar kind of indigenous society in my book based on my experiences. So your society speaks of climate change and its after effects in a very subtle way. I was curious to know what kind of stories inspired this or inspire you in general when you write your stories, climate stories especially. And do you have any writers who speak of environment in an interesting way? Do you find that any writer's work interesting? Can you elaborate a bit about that?
Right. So, climate fiction, in my understanding, are testimonies of warning and hope. As Prthvir said, both are required, right? So, good climate fiction is not just passive storytelling, but rather a very active protester to the current scheme of things, which is quite relevant in all of the stories in the anthology we are today talking about. And the first and a very direct influence that I already mentioned was Nenedi Okorafor, because I was attracted to African futurism because I saw our community in that school of thought. And her novel "Who Fears Death," which is a speculative fiction, it beautifully captures a world which has decolonized itself from any Western influence, especially in terms of storytelling. So the storytelling is not just about the 3 sections of the story: the introduction, the crisis, and then the resolution. It's not just about that. It's as Alina said, that the inherent character of the story is the first and foremost important part of or part of the storytelling, which is quite prevalent in African futurism. So that was a very great influence in creating this fictional community. And the other all of the books that have influenced me or that I like are have this inherent perspective that Alina talks about, where no matter what is the umbrella uh, the topic that you're battling with, your perspective or your historicity that you're bringing to that topic, it's very important. For example, Who Fears Death by Nanadeo Korafor, or The Living Mountain by Amitabh Ghosh, which is like a non-fiction account of an indigenous man who has lost his place of living to globalization, modernization, what so have you. And then Afterglow, which was edited by Grist, which is basically climate fiction for future ancestors. All of these different books share a different perspective. For example, the short story collection Wonder Tales for a Warming Planet, which is edited by Rajat Chaudhary. It's I think that is the most refreshing one, because if in that, children are the basically the soldiers of the change, because they are battling with a society that is under great destruction because of global warming and other climate changes that are affecting us now currently. And so while as a reader, while you are reading them, you are not just given information about the pitfalls of greed and unlimited exploitation of a planet, but rather you get into the head of whosoever is going through with it. Just like, for example, Rina mentioned that she's living in Himachal and a landslide occurs. So a figure on a paper and somebody's non-fiction or fiction somebody's account of what they went through while that landscape was happening, or the after effects of that landscape, what is going to affect you more as a human is very important, because the main idea is that the change does not always occur with policy. There has to be a mass agreement to that policy, to that change. And so that mass agreement, I believe, climate fiction is a really, really good podium for that, mass hypnosis, if you will, of the crowd to finally agree that climate change is real.
Thank you, Ayushi. So, okay, how do you think climate stories are placed in today's publishing environment? Are publishers welcoming of it, or we had a panel discussion on this a few years ago. We just like to know if it has changed. And as per our list, out of the thousands of books that comes out of English books, fiction, non-fiction that comes out of Indian publishing industry, every year we get less than 100, a very sad number. Actually, not even 100, less than 70, a very sad number. So we'd like to know how.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of sort of approaches to this. Like, overall, the appetite for new fiction is very little. It's got nothing to do with climate stories or lack of climate stories. Just generally, like editors, which is not to say that all the editors are like this, but a lot of the editors, especially in traditional publishing, I feel like the indie presses and the slightly more boutique publishers do take bigger risks, in fact, really don't end up taking chances on new fiction. Like, one of the more prominent features that I wanted to employ and I could employ for this anthology is, because this is independently produced and distributed, is that I wanted to sort of put in print as many emerging voices as possible, right? People who don't really have a social media following. So that's also a thing, in that editors, I mean, I feel like their hands are tied. I don't think they're doing it willingly necessarily, but things like social media following or a public presence before commissioning a book are conversations that do happen. And these are just the realities of the industry. I don't even know who is to really blame for that, but that's the reality of the system. So I would say that it's not necessarily about climate fiction as such. I don't even think anyone is really using the phrase climate fiction in publishing. We're using the phrase because, we're sort of tangentially connected to the topic of climate change. So that's one. Another is, so, I would say that getting a climate fiction book published would be just as difficult as getting any book published, especially when it comes to good, serious literature in India, it will just be super hard. I'm only laughing because, my book came out like a year and a half ago, and like, I'm just thinking about, it's just hard any which way you slice it, right? That being said, I do think there's quite a few presses. So, for example, Westland has instituted their own, I don't know if the word would be label, but imprint, which is just sci-fi. And I'm imagining, unfortunately, I've not read it, but I'm imagining that within their sci-fi imprint, there would be a lot of space for speculative, dystopic, genre fiction, as we call it. But I do think that if I had to compare it to the West, for example, like gun to my head, I do think that we don't have enough published literature on the topic, but I don't think that's because people aren't writing. I think it's just because the stories or those books aren't getting picked up. Just like we see the same names in circulation every year, that's also because debut novels don't get picked up, right? Like really good ones. So I feel like that's a problem that's endemic to the industry. And I don't think it's particularly speaks to the state of climate fiction. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one debut writer making it big changes, changes the thought process through the industry. UN, for example, his editor, UN's editor, intertitle, Sivapriya was there in one of our panels, and she said how difficult it was to present UN's book, though she believed so much in it, and how much gets, at the pitching table, how much gets sidelined.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just the grim reality of publishing world over, not just in India.
Yeah, right. So thank you for that, Alina. So I'd like to, Vijayata was not able to join us today, and her beautiful story, Calypso Housing Society, it's something that's, about what waste and waste processing can do to humans who are in proximity to it. So I'll just read out her response and my question. So our question was morphological changes that happen due to, waste processing and all that is something that is not many people are aware of. And in the fictional society that she created, a lot of thought has gone into ironing out these small dynamics of the society living together with the waste that is just beyond their world, and what that entire thing does to them morphologically, physiologically, and psychologically and everything. So our question to her was, how much is the story inspired by your journalistic assignments? So Vijayata is a journalist by profession, and I'm reading out a response here. The society is entirely fictional, of course, but the premise is indeed built on small journalistic work and also reading about the aftermath of industrial disasters such as Bhopal gas tragedy. A decade or so ago, I visited a massive garbage depot in a village while I was in college studying to become a journalist. The garbage accumulated over decades, and some mainly from a nearby city. That it resembled a hill from afar really shocked me. There were so many pests around, and people who worked there were not given any protective gear by the authorities. There were children playing there too. I remember visiting local municipal authorities to ask them what they were doing about this, but they seemed nonchalant. The village residents were angry and were constantly protesting, blocking garbage trucks from entering, and so on. When I spoke to them, they kept asking me how I could feel if somebody came and dumped garbage in my house. This really stayed with me, especially their anger and the authorities' lack of care. But to build a sustainable garbage disposal system, I have tried to translate this frustration into a short story. And our next question was an obvious one, how she silences the journalistic voice when it comes to fiction. So, is there any difficulty she faces in silencing that reporter's voice? Her response was, When I write fiction, I am no longer a journalist. It is, of course, easier said than done because the journalistic voice is a sharp, critical, and unforgiving one. It is a work in process to turn down the volume of that voice. In reporting, every detail is essential, but in fiction, it is not required to give so much detail unless it is taking the story forward. A lot of it is left to the reader to imagine and play with. What has also helped me grow as a writer is developing the voice of the main character I am writing about. I visualize what they look like, what they wear, how they speak, etc., to really work my imagination to build the story. There is also much space to play around with genres like speculative fiction. There is a dream sequence in a short story I'm currently writing and completely defies logic. In journalistic writing, I would never be able to play with words in such a way. So Vijayata had some interesting answers. So thank you, Alina, for coordinating that.
Sure. I think climate fiction writers are actually quite lucky in many respects because there's a great many competitions and anthologies for climate fiction, and quite often they're actually framed in terms of solar punk, which is a more kind of optimistic take on how society may develop in a kind of progressive way into the future. So I think I'm always a little bit surprised at how many competitions, contests, funded anthologies there are in sort of the solar punk space. So, and I think a lot of this is actually from some of the kind of philanthropies who are quite keen to ensure that climate remains part of the cultural discussion, especially during the kind of culture wars that we're having in America. So I think it's quite good news there. And that's really to Benedict's question. Sorry, Alina, what was I think I slightly missed what you wanted to asking about.
No. I was just going to start answering that, but don't worry.
Oh,
Please
sorry. Okay. I'll defer to other people now then.
And Alina, would you like to take it? I'll read out the question. It is easier to train non-fiction writers. How can we train more youngsters to write climate fiction? But before that, the role of fiction in the Anthropocene arena.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll just illustrate with this with like a very small example. I'm actually sort of in like a forest right now. I mean, which is partly why my Wi-Fi is so patchy, and I've sort of disconnected from the grid for the last 1 week, and I've just been staying here, so on and so forth. There's like langurs around, there's like monitor lizards, and the first 2 days I was terrified, and I wouldn't walk places, I wouldn't cross the path because I was genuinely just scared. I mean, and then by the fourth day, I just couldn't care less. I was just walking wherever I wanted. I was like outside having my coffee. There was a langur right across, and we had like a bit of like a staring contest. And I was just thinking about, and I had this thought about exposure and sort of what we're really exposed to in our lives, right? Like I used to live in Goa, so my connection with the natural world was far more, like far deeper and more enriched than what it is currently in Delhi. And that's just the nature of most cities world over. I wouldn't even blame just Indian cities, although they are significantly worse in many aspects. And I was just thinking along these lines of how something feels so terrifying because you're just not in contact with it. And the more the body gets trained to be in contact with it, the easier it becomes to observe it, actually. And I feel like for a writer, the sort of nucleus of what we do is observation more than anything else. So I mean, I don't know, I'm kind of answering both questions at the same time, but I feel like the worlds we inhabit and sort of the things or the moments or the shifts in time that we choose to observe inform our writing. And I feel like everybody who writes climate fiction, I don't like using labels, which is why I did that, but anybody who writes climate fiction or anybody who writes fiction will inevitably write about the Anthropocene. You cannot escape it. If you are sensitive, if you are intuitive as a writer, you will be tuned into the natural world, which is why we see many great works that aren't climate fiction, but the Anthropocene is central to their preoccupation, right? Like it's not either or. We exist because of that and vice versa. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I feel like getting younger people to be interested in climate fiction is just a function of getting them to be interested in fiction, which is a function of probably ban social media and AI, you know? So I mean, that's reductive, but you know what I mean? Like, people just don't have the capacity to read, right? Like, our attention spans are completely, I mean, here I've been reading for like 8 hours a day. And whereas in a city, I simply can't. So I think it's that more than anything else. I feel like the demarcation of the process of writing and the natural world and the world that we inhabit is actually a bit of a disservice to both. Yeah.
Thank you, Alina. And yeah, no, banning AI is not reductionist at all. I am with you on that. So, social media or whatever. So, yeah, it's a very cautious thing we do with our children as well. Limited screen times and all that. And you're very right about, lesser contact means lesser contact with the world that is outside of your human society means fear. Because I saw that change in Nilgiris, where my parents are and where I was born and raised. Uh, in my village around, we used to seeing Gore's footprint like 10 years ago, 10, 15 years ago. And the minute they appeared in our eyes, it was really intimidating. But now they're just almost domesticated, close to the lines of being domesticated. And so it is with bears. And to see a bear was such a huge thing like that. But then, yeah, so Benedict says there seems to be we'll move on with the questions. So audience, please do type in your questions if you have any, or you can just raise your hands. And okay, Benedict says there seems to be a Goa connection among all the writers here. There's something about Goa, Benedict. It just, pushes that artist in you maybe. And Swada, thank you, Swada, for your question. She says, hi, not very young, not very old. I am trying to write a climate fiction graphic novel and really struggling, despite being a naturalist and a wildlife illustrator and a student of journalism and wildlife filmmaking. Looking for any advice or any mentor here who can give any guidance. So it's open to all of you. Ayushi, Prashant, Prthvir, Alina. Anybody wants to take it?
I mean, I would say that it's kind of amazing. Oh, that's really cool. Marine animals. I think it's really amazing that you have all of these experiences and you have all of these skills that you can put to use. But in a weird way, I would say that, like, sort of the boxes that we are used to being in, and sort of that role that we're used to playing, sometimes quite often almost takes away from the story or what we're meant to be writing. And at least that's kind of the approach I try to approach most of my work with, where I'm practically starting from scratch, where I'm trying to like excavate from my psyche just in terms of like what's bothering me now and just documenting it super raw, instead of having like maybe the baggage of my lens. I don't know if that helps, but yeah, I would say like almost just uh, having a blank page is actually pretty exciting, just in terms of like not having any preconceived notions and putting everything out there to see what emerges.
Thank you, Alina. Anybody else like to pitch in? Ayushi, Prashant, Prithvi?
I mean, the only thing I would add to what Alina is saying is that I don't know if you're struggling with finding a story, or you're afraid that you will write something that you don't like or others don't like. I mean, just if so, what are you struggling with? I'm sorry. I mean, I mean, you're inside my head right now. I'm in this situation all the time. I think I mean, but what I do is I just write the bad version. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like you don't have a middle. You might have a bad middle, is what you think. But I think you have to write the bad thing first, and then you can see, because I think why in the process of writing the bad thing, something good might emerge, but at least the bad thing is out. In my head, it's more like it's in my head and it's troubling me, but so I need to like expel it. So I'll write the bad thing and it's gone now. And I think you'll be surprised that you might actually find something, within that bad thing. But that's what I don't think you don't have a middle. You have a middle that you think doesn't work, but put it down at least. Like, it's better to have a bad story than no story. You know what I mean? Like, you have to start somewhere, and maybe that'll help.
Thank you, Prithvi. Yeah, and it's something for all of us to remember. It's better to have a bad story than no story at all. So thank you to all of you who joined us. It's almost time, and we've had a wonderful conversation. And this is the beginning of the many that are to follow. Thank you, Alina. Thank you,
Thank you much.
Prthvir. Thank you, Ayushi. And I'm just handing it over to Shiruti before we close down.
Before we wrap up, a small request from all of us at GLF is that please do follow us on our social media platforms, our Instagram, LinkedIn, as Ganesh sir mentioned, Facebook as well, if you haven't already. We'll be announcing the dates for this year's Green Literature Festival very, very soon, along also with a bunch of other exciting updates and events. So we'll also, we are planning more on conversation like this one. So please keep an eye on our socials. And if you'd like these kind of updates delivered straight into your inbox, please do subscribe to our newsletter as well. Monisha is our editor for the newsletter. So thank you so much for spending this hour with us. On behalf of Monisha and also the entire GLF team, we hope to see you again online and hopefully at the festival as well. Have a great evening ahead.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone who joined. Thank you so much. Thank you, Alina. Nice meeting you.
Thank you, Alina. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Prashant. We'll be in touch.